for quarterback 2 is heating up. But who will it be? Bryson Barnes or JaQuinden Jackson? We're talking about it on today's edition of the Locked On Utes podcast.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms. My name is JT Wistrcill, former student intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. On today's show, we're going to be going over the backup quarterback battle, talking about who is going to be backing up the main man, Cam Rising. And to help me out with this, wanted to bring on a special guest today in ESPN 700s, Porter Larsen, who is fresh off a week that include clubbing with Shaq and little bit of back and forth with the president of Wistrcill Sports on Twitter. Porter, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks for having me, JT. Looking forward to talking some football, finally.
Yeah, it is so great this time of year, always having football back. The preseason rankings, of course, releasing this week. And, the past few years, the big talking point has been who's going to be the starting quarterback. 2 years in a row, we've entered fall camp with a quarterback competition. So by comparison, this camp seems a little bit less newsy, basically, because there isn't that big who's going to be the most important position, who's starting at the most important position on the field. Instead, we're talking about the backups, and that is an extremely important position because if something happens and Cam's goes down, who's going to step up? And Utah has two really qualified guys for it in JaQuinden Jackson and Bryson Barnes, both guys we saw get some playing time last year. And as it pertains for this coming season, and we're going to see which of these guys gets named the official backup quarterback after this Saturday's scrimmage, I feel like JaQuinden's going to win this. I just feel like he's the more athletic of the two, and I feel like the coaches have talked about the strides he's made in his game, and I got to believe that relates to his accuracy because I felt like that was the one thing that was really holding him back last season from, let's say, going into the Rose Bowl where Bryson Barnes went in, because we know JaQuinden is a better athlete. His ability to make guys look absolutely ridiculous in space is what a lot of few guys, regardless of just position in general, can do across college football. So I think with that improved accuracy, I feel like this is JaQuinden's job.
Yeah, and, I probably agree with you from a general standpoint. QB2 is going to be JaQuinden. I feel he's going to take the second most reps as a quarterback in 2022, but I'll throw a caveat on there. I think they're two very different players and two players that the Utes can still use in different ways, right? JaQuinden may be listed as QB2, but Bryson may do a bunch of the traditional QB2 things, like holding the kicks or being the main signal caller for Cam on the sideline with the different colored vest on. There's those little things that I think Bryson has such a good handle on the offense and the scheme. I think he'll still be kind of that traditional QB2, but JaQuinden is a guy who you have to get on the field in some way. You have to be able to weaponize his abilities and what he's able to do on the field in open space, right? And as you mentioned, he's come a long ways throwing the ball. He's really made some steps there. So for JaQuinden, I don't necessarily see him as a traditional quarterback too, but I do see him getting some reps in different ways. Maybe Cam Rising's thrown outside for out wide with Andy Ludwig's trick play here or there, or you have a wildcat package for JaQuinden Jackson. I think they're going to find ways to get him involved, even though it may not be the traditional QB2 way. But like you said, probably going to win the job as far as the depth chart goes.
I love that idea you just brought up with still having Cam out there as a wide receiver as well, because I just think it puts defenses in such a bind because you're so worried about, you want to pack the box to factor in JaQuinden, but Cam is athletic enough where if you leave him uncovered, he will run down the sideline and you'll be able to pick up a big yardage, and he's a football player. He's going to catch the ball as well, so that's something I would love to see this Utah football team employ. And yeah, you mentioned you got two really good backups. This isn't a problem. It's the same thing with the offensive line. It's not like this is a controversy or a battle because we don't have a good second option. Both guys are extremely qualified and both bring different things to the table that makes this battle so much fun to kind of break down and analyze. And kind of talked about the signal calling that Bryson provides. You always need your backup quarterback, someone to be calling in the signals, kind of act as an extra barrier between coach and player as they're getting the signals and hearing that stuff as well. And with JaQuinden, we saw a lot of those goal line packages that were really successful a year ago. But then he, like a lot of the Utes running backs last year, had some fumbling stuff, fumbled once in game, and then we didn't really see it again. So it's going to be interesting to see. And just talking about, we both think JaQuinden's going to win this job. And I think we're going to see him. I don't know if we'll see him down in Gainesville. I'll say that. But after that, I don't know. I feel like we could see once a week where JaQuinden comes in the red zone and they kind of toy with that package. I feel like it's something we could see at least once a game. But how often do you think we'll see JaQuinden if Cam stays healthy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's matchup dependent, right? There's certain defenses that are going to give you better looks against a quarterback that does that, right? Teams that maybe struggle in the linebacker unit, teams that don't ever spy the quarterback. If you see some of those tendencies, that's when you can I'm going to throw JaQuinden in and maybe we can, surprise them a little bit, get a 14-yard first down here. And those are the things that I think you'll see more from with JaQuinden Jackson. And like I said, it's kind of matchup dependent. It's hard to really gauge how often that happens. And then, as you mentioned, last year did get his opportunity and fumbled it. So for him, it's about making the most of those opportunities when you do get them. He's got the ability, JT. We've seen mostly in fall or spring practices and away from the Pac-12 network or ESPN cameras, but we've seen JaQuinden and what he can do. So the ability's there, the firepower's there. He's a weapon that the Utes can use, but I don't know exactly how often that will be, especially when you have a guy like Cam Rising running your offense.
100%. One of the best quarterbacks and the best in the Pac-12 for my money, and one of the best in the country as well. So you're not going to take him off the field a lot. And it's interesting as well to see, like, I'll ask you this first. I feel like if Cam goes down with an injury, we will still see JaQuinden come in and be quarterback number 2. But do you think there's definitely a chance, depending on the matchup, that we would see Bryson Barnes come in for some reason?
There's a chance. I would say there's a chance. Don't discount Bryson Barnes. There's a reason he was the guy they chose in the Rose Bowl. There's a reason he came into January 1st in Pasadena on the depth chart as number 2. And granted, some of that reasoning is JaQuinden was a little banged up during the season. Obviously, you mentioned the fumble. But Bryson had a really good grasp of Andy's offense, and that's why they felt comfortable putting him in that Rose Bowl game. If we get into conference play and Cam goes down and they're not entirely comfortable with where JaQuinden is, I absolutely see them putting Bryson in and still using JaQuinden in those ways that I think he's going to be used, whether Cam's on the field or not.
Yeah, it's going to be fun, and there is room for both of these guys to make an impact this coming season and what figures to be a huge one for the Utes. And before we move on to our next topic, Porter, I did want to ask you, I talked about it yesterday. I felt like number 7 was a very fair place for Utah. I felt like I could have made an argument for them to be even as high as 4, and we saw a couple of voters in the AP put them in that top 5 range. But what did you think about Utah's 7th ranking in the AP poll?
Yeah, I think, number 1, preseason rankings are, we haven't even played a snap. Utah hasn't played a snap. Alabama hasn't played a snap. It's all projections, right? That being said, they are a way to gauge where your program is at. I think more so gauge your program rather than your team this year, right? And for Utah, it's a sign of respect. This is the highest preseason ranking they've ever had in the AP, and good reason. Obviously, you're coming off a Rose Bowl win and an impressive Pac-12 title run. But yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Number 7, I think I had, a prediction anywhere from 6 to 9. 1 through 3 is set. From 4 from 4 JT to like 20 something, you could interchange them all because we haven't seen them play. We haven't seen them against each other. We haven't seen any common opponents. So really, I do look at 1, 2, and 3 in a class of their own. And then, you can make an argument for Utah, A&M, Baylor, like any of these schools right there behind them. And I think each of those schools, if they want to make a playoff run, obviously are going to have to, and Utah has a really good chance early in the year, they're going to have to show people what they can do, and they're going to have to do it early because there are like I mentioned, 20 teams vying, more than 20 teams, but what I see is 20 or 25 teams vying for that fourth playoff spot.
No, 100% agree. The legitimate ones. And that's something I mentioned as well when I've been kind of talking about the rankings this week, is you can't nitpick the top three. They're clearly the class of college football right now. Then after that, there can be arguments for all these teams. So it is something that's very interesting to talk about. One thing that's going to be paramount for Utah being amongst that group is the play of their secondary. And we're going to touch on that in just a second. But first, want to tell you guys about Drive Sober Tsunami. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's not a big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyways? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Your insurance goes up, you lose your license, you lose your job, you total your car, you kill someone. Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are tragic and often deadly. However, they still don't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel while under the influence. That's why police officers are out there right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you're okay to drive after a few drinks, if you think you're okay to do that, think again. Play it safe, plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. Once again, drive sober. Drive sober, Tsunami Live Read. Guys, please be smart during this football season. If you guys are having a couple make a plan, get ahead of it, and stay safe. So moving on to the secondary. This feels like, what'd you say, Porter?
Retweet.
Yes, 100%. Hey, speaking of retweets, if you guys want to hear more of Porter, make sure you guys follow him at Larsen_ESPN and check out ESPN 700. But moving on into the secondary, look, there's only one place to start when you talk about the secondary. It's Clark Phillips, the highest recruit to ever commit to Utah at the time he came to the team, and a guy who has just lived up to all of the hype. And there was a lot of it coming in as well. He's the guy who's come in and completely locked down one side of the field. And you stand next to Clark. He's not the biggest guy, but everything else that he requires to be an elite corner, he does well. His reactions are phenomenal. His change of direction. He plays the ball so well in the air. It's what allowed him to – Utah gave up a lot of yards in the Rose Bowl, obviously, and he still had a good game. You see him against a lot of those bigger number one receivers in the Pac-12, and he hangs with them. And when you have a guy who's a true shutdown corner, it opens up so many things for you defensively. I just think Clark is in for a monster year, and I'm really excited to see what he's going to do. And I do think this will be his final year as a Ute because he plays so well. Yeah,
Clark is as advertised, right? Highest rated recruit coming into Utah. And when you're the highest rated recruit coming into Utah as a defensive back, that's a whole other level, right? Knowing the guys who've come through this program and have been coached by Whittingham and Scally and Sharif Shaw. And when you hear those guys talk about defensive backs, the way they talked about Clark Phillips when he was a recruit, you knew a special player was coming, right? And the only time I had really heard them talk about a corner like that was Jalen Johnson. Jalen came in, was very process-oriented, very routine-based, exactly like Clark Phillips, right? So what that does is, yeah, they're good, they're talented, but when you're that focused on the process and the routine of it day in and day out, and then you team up with a guy like Kyle Whittingham who does that more than anyone that I've ever met, it creates a really special team, right? And a dynamic that allows people to just get better and better and better. And that's exactly what you've seen from Clark Phillips. And that's what you're going to see on kickoff again. This offseason, he's only gotten better and better and more fluid with his movement, right? You mentioned it. He's not a big guy. He's a bowling ball. But he's gotten a lot more fluid with his hips and his movement in the last year or so because before that, it was all about his body, which, you have to focus on. But he's really taken a different approach to it. And man, it's paid off. Clark is, as advertised, you mentioned it, probably going to be playing in the pros and maybe as soon as the next football season. So, yeah, starts with Clark Phillips. But, man, you look at that defensive back room. I know there's question marks there, but all those question marks have plenty of bodies there to answer them. We just have to figure out which guys are going to be in the mix.
Yeah, and I know from speaking to Clark and some of these other guys at camp, this is a group that believes they have the best secondary in the Pac-12. And that does start with Clark Phillips, and you can tell he's a phenomenal leader as well, has the confidence. He is a coach's dream. The last thing I wanted to mention about Clark is you just talk with him and you're like, did your coaches brainwash you to talk like this? It's like, no, it's 100% authentic. Clark is just that much of a hard worker, a committed guy, a leader, and his play is outstanding on the field. But one of the reasons he feels like this team has the best secondary in the Pac-12 are those other guys on the roster. And I want to start with a guy in JaTravis Broughton, who I think last year was going to have a really good season. He was honorable mention Pac-12 in 2020. Last year had a really good start to the season versus BYU. He had 7 tackles in that game, and then we lose him. And I think that's one of the things that kind of hurt this Utah team, especially against Ohio State late in the year, was not having him. But I feel like he's going to come in. He has 21 career games played, 7 starts as well. I think Broughton's the guy who's going to come in and really be the number 2 corner on this team and going to do a good job. And the games he's going to matter the most are games like teams against USC. I think he's really going to shine.
Yeah, I mean, the cornerback opposite of Clark is going to have a lot of pressure on him to perform because the way Clark plays and the way he defends, you mentioned he's good at playing ball once it's in the air, but honestly, Clark doesn't get that many opportunities because of how tight of a corner he is and how few chances he takes as a corner. So while there's a lot of pressure on the opposite corner as Clark, there's also going to be a lot of opportunities to be a playmaker. And you mentioned JT Broughton. That's a guy who has been an all-conference player before. He's really good. It's just about seeing if he can come back from that injury and be his full self, be the player that we saw in that COVID-shortened year. And I think JT has a legitimate chance to replicate an all-conference year and be that type of player. Like I mentioned, the more you play opposite of Clark, the more balls that are going to come your way. So it's one of those situations where, yeah, you're going to have to be good, but you're also getting a lot of opportunities as a ball hawk, right? You hear RSNB. That's what the defensive backs say all the time. And it's something where they are all in on trying to get at the ball violently, but within the scheme, right? And that's something that I think JT is really good at. He covers a lot of ground. He covers a lot of space. He's a long, rangy corner. And opposite of Clark, I think that's kind of a perfect matchup because you can throw Clark on wide receiver 1, but you can also throw Clark on some of those odd mismatch kind of guys, right? Say it's a Covey or a guy who gives JT Broughton, the longer, rangier corner, some trouble. Throw him on there, and JT can cover the 6'2", 6'3" guys that are playing for USC or some of those other schools. So you mentioned it. The cornerback position's huge. The cornerback opposite of Clark is huge. But I really do think that if in the right position, if they stay within the scheme and react to the quarterback well, whoever that guy is, whether it's JT, whether it's Faybian Marks, Zemaiah Vaughn, they're going to have a lot of opportunities to make some plays. And that's exactly what Morgan Scalley wants him to be in.
I would be surprised this year if Clark led the Pac-12 again in passes deflected, because even though, look, he's going to be guarding number 1 receivers and these quarterbacks are going to want to go to their number 1 receivers. Right. I just think they're going to respect Clark that much, and there's just not going to be a lot of opportunities to find these guys. Right. Yeah, that you're not going to be able to, that these other guys are going to get those targets like you're talking about. And I love that you brought up Zemaiah Vaughn and Faybian Marks as well. With the way college football is trending, we see more and more air raid offenses, more and more 4 guys out wide. Even though Utah is loving the tight end right now, Utah kind of has more of an NFL mindset with the tight end, where you'll see lots of NFL teams use 2 to 3 tight ends. A lot of colleges are kind of like, we don't really need tight ends. We'd rather have 4 wide receivers out there. So I think it's so great to have multiple guys who can cover. And I think Zemaiah Vaughn, 13 starts with him. Faybian Marks has 7. These are guys as well who I feel confident going out there. And if they have to guard number 2 receivers for all game or go on some of these other guys, I do feel like Utah has 4 guys who can really get after it in coverage.
And JT, we go back to the Rose Bowl last year, right? Mekhi Bernard playing corner, a bunch of dudes who are out of position. Go back a game further. They had, beyond the guys that we just mentioned, Kane Savage, Kenzel Lawler, Jocelyn Malasaka. Like, there are 5+ other guys. We haven't even mentioned the nickel, right? Malone Mataele and Alicia Lloyd. Those guys have that locked down. They're too deep in the nickel. They have 2 more guys of corners that can come on and whether it's USC with 5 guys spread out or Washington State doing the air raid, you can throw 6 DBs on the field and be comfortable with it if you're Utah. And man, that's something that Morgan Scalley and Sharif Shah, I'm sure, really love to hear. And it's a good problem, right? They have so many guys right now that projecting forward, when Nate Ritchie comes back from his mission, when you get the 4-star guy coming in next year, you might have too many corners, and you're going to see guys transfer out because of the amount of corners that are in this room. A far cry from what we were thinking at the Rose Bowl a few short months ago.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that was something I was concerned about for Utah's ranking, is that people would watch the Rose Bowl and be like, this team doesn't have any secondary. But It just genuinely seemed like these guys did their homework and realized, no, there were just injuries there. And even though Mekhi is one of the freakiest players in college football, thanks to Bruce Feldman for that, it's extremely hard to still play another position, especially at this level.
Yeah, I mean, what Mekhi did in that Rose Bowl was phenomenal. I know he got burnt a few times, but just asking him to go out there and play corner while still producing on the offensive end, it just shows his ability as a football player rather than just a running back. And you're going to see a lot of Mekhi Bernard in 2022.
Absolutely. I'm excited for the year he's going to have, just like I'm excited for these cornerbacks. But of course, there's another part of the secondary, that being the safeties, and we're going to touch on them in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you guys about Intercap lending. There is a reason that no lender helps more families in Utah with their mortgage needs. Intercap gets deals done. Quick and simple process. Intercap closes loans 2 weeks faster than the industry average. And though fast is great, the ultimate goal is to create a stress-free home loan process. And that is why Locked On's personal loan officer, Steve Carter, has delivered to hundreds of Locked On listeners so far, including Locked On's founder, David Locke. Let's be honest, if Steve can help keep David on track through the entire process, Steve can help anyone. And though Intercap is new to the Locked On Utes scene, it's not new to customers. Intercap has been assisting customers with all their mortgage needs since 1978. That's 43 years of experience, and Steve Carter has been providing Locked On listeners with the best experience since 2018. Intercap is headquartered here in Utah, but licensed to help with all your mortgage needs in 40 states. Give Steve a call. His direct number is 385-800-8528. You will not find a more responsive loan officer. NMLS number 190465. So back to this group. We feel really good about the corners, but they're not alone. You also got to feel good about the guys on the back end. And man, do I feel good about this group as well. And it starts for me with Cole Bishop. What a freshman season he had, coming on so strong. Played in 10 games in total, started the final 6, and he was just a playmaker on the back end. He's a guy that I know in the run game is going to come down, make some physical hits, does a really good job in coverage as well. And Bishop is a guy I think is going to really explode in his second year. A lot of the Pac-12 teams were already eyeing him a little bit, as well as things like Athlon Sports noticing his play. And I think after this year, if Clark does end up going on, he's going to be the guy that everyone talks about in the secondary, and he's going to be known. He's known and feared by people in the Pac-12. I think even after week 1, he could be known and feared nationally.
Yeah, Cole Bishop bursted onto the scene last year, and I don't think a lot of people were expecting that, right? They didn't get the insight. We weren't able to watch fall camp. We didn't get to see him in the spring much. So Cole Bishop was a guy who kind of surprised some folks last year, but man, was he good. You mentioned the physicality coming up and stopping the run, but also his ability to stay back and drop in coverage. Does it all as a safety, and that's exactly what you want. It's almost as if Chase Hansen never moved down to linebacker, right? He's that physical of a player and that good of an athlete, and you pair him with a couple good corners. You pair him with another safety, and I think you have a really, really potent defensive backfield. And looking at that pairing, it's probably going to be R.J. Hubert. I think you're going to see some Clayton Isbell as well. But yeah, the safety spot, as you mentioned, it starts and ends with Cole Bishop, and he's a guy who is going to make a lot of plays. He has a nose for the football, a nose for creating turnovers, and just being in the right spot at the right time, right? He's physical, he's fast, and violent, and a lot of those guys sometimes get out of the scheme, right? I go back to Marquise Blair, who is an NFL player. He's obviously phenomenal, but sometimes he was a little bit of a headache in getting out of the defense, right? Getting out of what Morgan Scalley and Kyle Whittingham wanted them to do. Now, he was able to get away with it in college because he was that good, that physical, and that fast. Cole Bishop isn't necessarily that type of athlete. So he combines Marquise's physicality, his ability to come up and stop the run and punish ball carriers with, I would say, a little more calculation on the back end and a little more calculation on the risk. And that's why I think, as you mentioned, Cole Bishop's bound to, I wouldn't say break out. I think he already broke out, but he's going to continue to do so. And behind him, even Sione Vaki's had a fantastic fall and a really good spring as well. So they're too deep, at least at the safety positions too.
100%. And one of the guys I wanted to give a little bit more love to is someone you touched on in RJ Hubert, who I think a lot of Utah fans may have actually forgotten about a little bit because he hasn't played the last 2 seasons because of injuries. But back in 2019, he was the guy who was making a lot of plays and everyone was excited about for the 2020 season. Then you get the weird COVID year, injuries as well played a role. But I feel like he's another guy that's going to have a really strong year and people are going to be like, oh yeah, I remember him because he's going to be making plays all over the place as well.
Yeah, RJ's been a guy who the Utes coaching staff has been comfortable throwing him into game situations for 2+ years now, right? So the ability, the defensive scheme, none of those are concerns for RJ Hubert. The concerns are, what does he look like coming off of those major knee injuries, right? Is he the same player that he used to be? Or, can he be better, right? We know how medical advancements have come along. I've worked with RJ a little bit during the summer, and he's moving really well, right? He's a guy who has done the right things as far as getting his body right. He's been really patient. Obviously, you have to be really patient when you're dealing with those kind of injuries. But now it's his time to get on the field and hopefully stay on the field, man. Like that's the X factor. That's the variable with RJ Hubert. It's staying healthy. It's staying on the field. And really getting enough reps to show what he can do, because really the question marks don't lie with his ability or his knowledge of the program or the scheme. It's all about staying on the field, keeping those knees healthy, and hopefully having the explosion that we saw from him before he got injured.
And Porter, it sounds like you know more than most just how much time RJ's put back into his recovery to getting healthy, getting back to it. And you put in so many times and hours for those opportunities on the field. So hopefully he is able to stay healthy and finally get those. And you mentioned Utah being too deep at safety as well. I was kind of curious to hear what you do think about some of those guys more, because I'm looking at a guy in Clayton Isabel who the coaches have been raving about. You got to love the length he has as well. This is a group that a lot of people, I think, last year might not have known about our safeties as much, but going after this season, I think this entire group is going to be revered by the Pac-12.
Yeah, man, we can go down the list. I mentioned Sione Vaughn already. I think he's kind of more of a Cole Bishop backup in that strong safety position. And then at free safety, keep an eye on Clayton Isbell. That's the one good part. If RJ Hubert isn't able to stay on the field or maybe has some complications or isn't, ready after that time off, well, you've got a guy who has been playing football, not here at Illinois State, and he was a 2-time FCS All-American. Go back and watch some of the tape if you can find it on Clayton Isbell. He's a really, really exciting player. Doing it at the other level, at the FCS level, you can kind of fall in love with the film a little too much, right? And I did that a little bit. But then to hear coaching staffs, the guys from the camp up on the hill, kind of rave about Clayton Isbell in the ways that I saw on film at Illinois State, man, I think that he's poised to really contribute this year. And, if Cole Bishop goes down, if RJ Hubert goes down, which at some point during the season, you're going to need some fill-ins in that back line, he's a guy who's ready to do it, and honestly, probably at both positions. Yeah,
and I love that you kind of mentioned as well, like what you saw from him at the FCS level. There's a lot of really good FCS guys across the country who could contribute, especially once they've been in programs for a few years, like can contribute at that next level. And it's a reason we see a lot of those guys get drafted as well. So it makes sense that this coaching staff is fired up about a guy in Clayton Isbell. Porter, really appreciate you stopping by the show today to talk about what is a great group of defensive backs the Utes have. What kind of stuff do you have going on coming up for the football season?
Yeah, man. For my 4th year, I believe, I'll be hosting Utes Game Day. So every year we have on game days like 10 hours of coverage, right? If you tune into ESPN 700 on a day when the Utes are playing, you'll either hear from me, Isaac Asiata, Stevenson Sylvester, Bill Riley, Scott Mitchell, or any of the other folks that we have on our broadcast. So the pregame shows will start 4 hours before kickoff every Saturday or Thursday, Friday, whatever it may be. It'll be me and Isaac Asiata to kick off game days. We'll have a rotating cast of characters kind of joining us. Last year we had Zach Moss, Steve Smith, and a bunch of really good guests. So we'll continue that and look forward. 18 days now from Florida and Utah, the number 7 Utes in Gainesville. So we're really excited for that. And then in addition to that, obviously, every day here on ESPN 700.
And we kind of talked about earlier, you mentioned 18, and I mentioned your Twitter handle as well, @Lars_ESPN. If you guys want a nice little reminder of 18 days being away, make sure you guys go follow Porter as well. He had a great tweet about that relating to a lot of people's favorite Utes. If you guys are in the market for a second listen every day, we want to recommend you guys check out Locked On Pac-12, where host Spencer McLaughlin and other local Pac-12 hosts will take you around the conference in under 30 minutes. Lots of season previews coming up right now as football is oh so close to being back. Thank you guys for joining us on Locked On Utes today. We'll see you tomorrow.